Introducing a new era for discerning Australian investors. Brought to you by Ausbiz and backed by deep market insight, professional analysis and a proven track record. Our focus is simple: to connect you with exclusive and compelling investment opportunities. Discover what's next at ausbizcapital.com.au.
Hello and welcome to the Global View on this Thursday. I'm Andrew Gagan. Good to have you with us again here at Ausbiz as we take a look at what happened overnight. Global stocks mostly lower, despite little market moving news on Wall Street. Investors contemplated minutes from the last Federal Reserve meeting ahead of highly anticipated earnings results from Nvidia, which were released after the bell. So shares in the world's most valuable semiconductor company rising around 4% in extended trade after beating sales expectations in the March quarter. However, its forecast second quarter revenue below market estimates, expecting around an $8 billion hit to sales from tighter US controls on exports of AI chips to China. Checking in on the other Mag 7 stocks, they were mixed with Apple and Meta the best performers there, up slightly. Elsewhere, HP cut its annual profit forecast with it expecting a moderation in PC market growth amid a volatile global economic environment. Its shares falling around 14% in extended trade. Salesforce raised its revenue and adjusted profit forecast for fiscal 26 as the enterprise software provider benefits from strong cloud spending while ramping up monetization of its AI agents. Shares rising around 3% in extended trade. And shares of sportswear retailer Dick's Sporting Goods gained after its first quarter results beat estimates. Whereas shares of copper miners, they fell, tracking the price of the red metal lower, with US listed shares of Rio and BHP down more than 1%. Now, in news just in, a US federal court has blocked President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs from going into effect. It's ruled that the president overstepped his authority by imposing across-the-board taxes on imports from nations that sell more to the United States than they buy. So the Court of International Trade saying the US Constitution gives the US Congress exclusive powers to regulate commerce with other countries, despite the president's use of emergency powers to safeguard the US economy. And the lawsuit was filed by the nonpartisan Liberty Justice Center on behalf of 5 small US businesses that import goods from countries targeted by those duties. We'll obviously await reaction, particularly from the president himself. Meanwhile, minutes from the last FOMC meeting of the US Federal Reserve says difficult trade-offs may need to be made in coming months in the form of rising inflation alongside rising unemployment, stating that participants agreed that uncertainty about the economic outlook had increased further, making it appropriate to take a cautious approach until the net economic effects of the array of changes to government policies become clearer. Well, US Treasury yields advanced after falling for 3 straight days, with the sale of $70 billion in US 5-year Treasuries showing healthy foreign demand. The yield on the 2-year note rising to 4%, the 10-year was up to 4.5%. Markets pricing in no chance of a cut to the Fed funds rate at the next meeting in mid-June, but 4 more cuts in this easing cycle. And the US dollar rose for the second straight day on optimism that trade deals will improve the US economic outlook. The Aussie trading at 64.2 US cents. And Bitcoin lower, currently at just below 108,000 US dollars. Oil prices, they gained more than 1% on supply concerns as OPEC Plus agreed to leave their output policy unchanged. And as the US barred Chevron from exporting Venezuelan crude, Brent crude futures up more than 1% to $65 a barrel. Copper down around 1.5%. Iron ore up slightly at $97 a tonne. And gold slipping, in fact, it's slipped further. It's currently down around 1% at $3,250 an ounce. Let's get more on what we are seeing stateside. Ira Epstein joining us from Linn Associates. Ira, welcome back. Are you across that news, but that federal court? What do you make of that?
It's typical of his first run. Everybody goes to court, everybody gets an injunction, then the president's team goes back, they get a stay of the injunction, then they fight it out in court. The stock market, though, on the news is up sharply. That news, you're up 433 points right now in the Dow. I'm looking at the quotes as I'm talking to you, 358 in the NASDAQ and 80 points in the S&P. So you're getting quite a rally off this news. Whether it lasts or not, it reminds me of that trade that traders talk about from the president. Every time he puts on a tariff and you buy the market on the break, you've been making money. It's all over the internet and you can read about that. This could be the opposite, where the market gets a big lift. And the question is, does it last or not? I don't know. We'll find out. It would certainly undo everything that the president has if it didn't then go back to Congress and he won the right to have these tariffs, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So it's beyond my pay grade. I'll let the lawyers figure this one out. We'll find out a lot more in the morning when everybody has something to say about it.
Well, I mean, obviously that would be immensely frustrating for the president, wouldn't it? So
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see what avenues he could possibly take to avoid that from transpiring. Meanwhile, Ira, let's take a look at what we're seeing. Obviously, the focus, though, prior to that was very much on that Nvidia result.
The Nvidia result's interesting, but if you'll notice, the one thing you got to start watching is they're making less percentage profit. They're doing more sales, less percentage gain. So the margin keeps falling a little bit. And that's what happens when you become a really monstrous company. They could end up being the biggest company in the world, in fact. But that's what you'd expect. That doesn't mean it's a negative. As I said, the market's 141 and a half or so tonight. So it's jumped up about $5.50 or so. I think it would have big problems getting back through on an easy run here, the 150 level. So I'd be watching that carefully. I also saw that you started off about $3 higher in Salesforce, and the last I saw it was up near $5. But both of those CEOs were just on Kramer's show, and he was really touting them bullish. So that probably got some buying going with the market as well.
All right. So more broadly in the economy at the moment, what are you seeing, Ira, particularly with the US consumer, given the results we've seen from the retailers?
Well, that is the interesting thing. First off, every week on Wednesday, we get US retail sales. And those sales are a weekly report, and they have been running solid between roughly 5.5% on the downside to over 6% on the upside. That doesn't show a U.S. consumer that is backing away from goods. It's the kind of goods that they're buying, which is fascinating. I wouldn't have thought that retail clothing would be as strong as it is. And yet, here's the big surprise. I mean, Abercrombie up, nearly 24% today or so. That's quite a move on it. Dick's Sporting moving out again. So the consumer is there. They're willing to spend. They're not traveling abroad. We realize in America that going abroad, Americans aren't welcome right now because of the president's policies, not because of Americans. I think Americans as a whole love everybody. It's, you get to these government tops, and I can understand people being very standoffish to us Americans. It makes sense to me.
All right. Meanwhile, interesting moves in the bond market at the moment. What are your observations there, particularly, I guess, given the sale of some of those bonds, but also what we're seeing in Japan at the moment?
Well, let's first go to Japan. The 40-year bond auction went very poorly. And I expected that. That's what I wrote in my newsletter last night before it happened. I said, if we couldn't do well with our 30-year and some of the others that we've been doing, surprise, why would the long term you want to invest? The sweet spot for an investor right now is 3 to 5 years. That's where I think you'll see the money show up. You can live with that, and it's not a bad return, 4.5%. So people can deal with that. The wild card is what you just said. What if the president's tariffs get thrown away? What does that do to interest rates? What does that do to this whole game plan? This really threw overnight something. It's the reason gold's down about $38 to $40. That would take away the inflation play, and that would be very painful for it. So be careful right here. What the Democrats, the Democratic Party in America against the Republicans have been doing is burying the president in lawsuits. It's one after the other until the Supreme Court, our highest court, decides, can the lower courts, federal or state, interfere with federal policy? That is the big issue that that our Supreme Court has to make a decision on. If they rule they can, the president's got nothing but troubles. If they rule no, he cannot, that's something else. And I think tonight's victory was for the Democrats with this motion, not by the Supreme Court necessarily, but by others, that they want to stop the tariffs. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, well, as I said, Donald Trump always seemed to have something up his sleeve, so he doesn't take these things lying down, does he? Ira, just before we go, what are you seeing with oil at the moment? Obviously with OPEC Plus looking to actually increase production. I mean, we're seeing further downward pressure on that price.
When I was with you last week, my favorite trade was to go short natural gas eventually. And today that trade was able to get executed on the futures market. If you go to my website, it's all there. And I'm still looking for that because the weather in the Midwest, big swath of the United States, has not gotten hot. We have plenty in storage. We typically put it away at this time. And the market just looks, as a chart, is still very weak. I wouldn't want to play the crude itself because I don't know what this president's the ruling on these tariffs might do one way or the other. I'm in a quandary now. What happens one way or the other? The stock market's taking it as bullish. So what will the energies do? Natural gas to me doesn't matter. We use it at home big, and it's not going to be in demand. We don't have the air conditioners on in a large part of the U.S. Chicago, where I'm at, has been running 15 degrees cooler than normal now for over a week. And there's no hot weather on the forecast that I see.
Well, maybe enjoy that while it lasts. Meanwhile,
We will.
that's a situation, though, in terms of trade and tariffs remaining very fluid. Ira, great to get across the very latest. Thanks for joining us from Linn Associates.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's return to the local market then. So we have seen, as Ira was talking about there, some those futures in the States are bounding higher off the back of that court decision that Trump has overstepped the mark and he doesn't have the power to impose those tariffs. We'll see how that plays out. But locally, we are expecting a positive start here with the SPI futures up more than 0.1%. We'll get right across that in just a couple of minutes' time.